Hi again, I'm Rebecca McMahon. I work at the Office of International Affairs. I'm an education abroad specialist, and I am joined today by one of my colleagues, Sylvia, and she is going to speak today on behalf of one of our partners, DIS, about urban planning in Denmark. So we're pretty excited to have her. Welcome, Sylvia, and I will hand it over to you.
Good evening from Copenhagen, and good day to all of you. It's really great to be here with you. I am an architect and urban planner, and I've been teaching at DIS also at integrated climate change planning and sustainable development since 2015. This semester has been a bit quiet, but we're really looking forward to the new one, and also having you in Copenhagen when that time will be possible. So I will share some of the things that we do here, and this topic will be on smart cities. I also have a bit of a presentation since you're not able to be here. It's pitch dark out there, so we can't be in the city. But I have taken some photos and a little video of the newest area being developed now, and one of the largest in Northern Europe. Please feel free to get all the questions that you might have at any point. You can use the chat, or you can just unmute and ask the questions. It's way more interesting to do that than for me talking all the time. So let's see if I can share the screen. Yes. And then we will jump into the smart cities. There we go. And it's working. Rebecca, can you confirm?
Yep, it looks like we can see the presentation isn't up, but we do see the slides.
Okay. Okay. What is this? There we go. I'm just going to turn off the other screen because I think that's why we have it like this. Let's see if it's better. No, I just need to put this into the right presentation mode. It's a weird display, isn't it? It shows the two. There we go. And now it should be okay. Yeah, perfect. Yes, so we are going to address a bit from the building perspective and planning perspective, but very tangible, connected to buildings and transportation. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a context so that you know where Copenhagen is, and in the bigger Danish context, in the European context as well. And then we're going to zoom in at this development scale. So Copenhagen wants to be carbon neutral in 2025. And that is, of course, a huge task. And it's a lot of work to be done. Since June this year, we also have a new law, a climate law, that actually requires saving further 70% of the emissions up until 2030. And we also have to be carbon neutral by 2025 in Copenhagen, but by 2050 off of fossil fuels and the entire scale of Denmark. So it's a huge challenge. We've already accomplished a lot of the steps that were implemented, and a lot of the goals that were actually set up until now. And there are three major domains that usually cities and governments can work with. And that's basically the scale of emissions. So the first emitters, the number one emitters on when we measure emissions, the quantity of them, it's actually buildings. Number two is food, and number three is transportation. So the very easy thing to do for cities here is actually to tackle the first one, the buildings. It's also because in Europe, a lot of the buildings are also owned by cities. And in Denmark and Copenhagen, even more so. So municipality has a huge stock that they can retrofit. And they also have a lot of lands that they can develop. So changing the building codes and also trying to make that sector much more efficient. It's one step. And then the second one usually chosen is the transportation sector, also because of the impact in city making and policy making has a lot to do with mobility. I like to say that mobility is actually the structure that holds the city together. And then it's the space in between the buildings. It's defined by mobility. And that, of course, is either walking or biking. We like to think that we are the first biking city in the world, but in terms of number of people biking, but we are in competition with Amsterdam in Netherlands. So walking, biking, public transportation, and then the car infrastructure. And the first one is actually the one that I will like to start with because it's closest to me as well, but it's also very, very important. So a great deal of emissions can actually be reduced by working with the building stock. So Copenhagen wants to be carbon neutral in 2025. So climate change is a big topic on the daily policy, but it's not so much as displayed in every single department, every single development. You may see a lot of projects that have to do with urban renewal that are connected with climate adaptation and a little bit of mitigation. The focus is on adaptation because in 2011, we had two major storms, events that were supposed to happen once in 100 years, and they came one after another. Second one was really, really impactful on the infrastructure in the central part. It was a major decision in that night to change funds from mitigation to adaptation. So this is what the city was focusing first on. So now a lot of building sites in the city have to do also with the infrastructure. That is what is below the street level. That has to do with the water management. The pipes is also quite old from 1850, but there's also a lot on the technological level. So smart cities is also a term that you will hear connected with Copenhagen and climate action. But what does that mean? Does that mean that technology is sort of like taking over and solving our problems? Not so much. So just like the Danish firm, big Bjarke Ingels group have designed this ring here for New York, Manhattan. Nature is actually the one that builds resilient cities and is the one that provides us also with a model of how buildings and people and all of this sort of life around and activities communicate with each other and provide this information that is necessary to move the city into the future. And that being said, it's also important that this is done in a more efficient way, because the main issue that we have during these days is this gross inefficiency that we have when we produce things, and it has a very big implication on the city scale. So also when we build new, we create a lot of waste. And when we retrofit, it's actually saving emissions, also during and after. So Copenhagen is focusing a lot on using nature as a tool. So sort of allowing and re-inviting water into the city. We are placed on the coast, and water is a very important identity in the city's sort of inner core and former harbor facilities. You see a lot of great photos from that, especially from summertime when you Google Copenhagen. But it's a lot into the city as well. So the city is actually made out of different built islands, city blocks that have the building on the sides. And then inside you have these courtyards, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. And then, of course, a network of parks, which is taking up larger scale of the city. The idea first is to work with the smaller scale and to empower communities into transforming these neighborhoods. And of course, it takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of networking. It takes a lot of infrastructure on learning from case to a case and taking this to the city scale. And another one is this network biodiversity corridors that have to be created to connect the different larger greener areas so that life can actually flourish in the city as well. As you know, the bees are finding their homes in here because in the countryside, there's too many pesticides and they can not live there. So turning water into an asset, that will be the blue infrastructure. And the green infrastructure is actually inviting more nature, not just lollipop trees, but a real network of diversity when it comes to green and reducing to a minimum the desert of grass, as we call it. So that is not productive, that is not useful, neither for water management nor for life support. So this is more or less the Copenhagen approach, working with nature. And then, of course, we come to this smart city idea. You'll hear that a lot of it is connected to technology, so embedding sensors everywhere and knowing a little bit where we are. But this has a lot more to do with people than it has to do with technology. There's this idea of using the grid pre-existent. In Denmark, we have district heating, and we have all the cables for internet and phone and television. Everything that is providing our services in our households is actually to be found under the street level. And then, of course, this is not synchronized. This is not coordinated. And every single time that you have to do either improvements in an area, or you have to climate adapt, or you have to build a new, then these services, they have to be in top shape and they have to be installed first. But they do take up a lot of time and a big chunk of the budget because there's no coordination in between the different actors. For instance, just close to where I'm now, we have the light rail project, which will be done in 2025. And it's a light rail that will connect north and south on the ring 3 of Copenhagen. So the city is growing into concentric circles, but incomplete because there's water on this side. So this will be a connection in between the university and the north, and all of the different sort of settlements in the greater area of Copenhagen, and the light rail will just run by that. And it has started this year, but this is just the first phase. Project will have 3 phases, and the first phase means that there's 15 different actors that have to come in first and lay all the infrastructure. In the second phase, that will begin hopefully next year if things go well. It means that all the preparatory work will have to be done on the road profile, the road diet change, and only after that, the real project, the building of the light rail infrastructure will come in. So you see that the importance of synchronizing first and then connecting and adding the sensors is an important part of the smart city and the grid infrastructure. but it has a lot to do with people, because there's people every single time behind these. It's either the consumers or the providers. So they really have to work one for another. And then there's also a philosophy here in Denmark, policy that started after the 73, which is the first oil crisis that actually hit development beginning after the Second World War. And Denmark realized that with no real access to oil and coal and natural gas, there's a problem of depending on one source of energy for every single part of our lives. So at that time, HOFOR, which is the main supplier for energy, had to become nonprofit. So what does that mean? It means that every single profit that they make on selling the hot water for us, for the district heating, for our homes, it actually has to go back into improving that infrastructure. So every single year they have to come to zero, and they have to keep the infrastructure at a very high standard and functioning level to reduce water consumption, to reduce heat loss, and that you can only do when you have a structure like that. So this has to do with, we named energy and heating the homes, but of course a lot of it goes into greenifying the car fleet. We are talking about the wind turbines and Denmark moving towards green energy. And for that we have something else which is called EnergyNet, and it's situated on Jutland here. I hope you can see my little arrow. And what does this do? This is actually situated in the middle of the country. And then all of the different wind parks are connected through networks across the water and the land. And you can see in real time how much they produce and how many CO2 emissions are actually saved. And there's a lot of people that also have shares into this infrastructure. So EnergyNet is basically a company that is private, but it is formed by the state in the first instance. And then what it does, it regulates and it builds the network for the different either citizens, cooperatives, firms to connect their energy producing wind mills or wind parks. And then getting into this transition from when Denmark wants to be carbon neutral in 2025. So you see in 2010, you see the percentages of how much the wind will cover. And you see two different colors. We have biomass as well. Another project by BIG, Bjarke Engels Group, which is taking the waste in Copenhagen and burning it to produce energy. And again, hot water that goes into our radiators to heat our homes. And then growing in 2020 and easily replacing coal until everything gets only into biomass and wind. There's already big projects going on into this direction. But that being said, you have these small units that produce the energy, but you need to have coordinated entity that can regulate the price, can provide the infrastructure, and that can only be public. So that's why EnergyNet exists, and it functions more or less like HOFOR is doing. And this is sort of a chart to give you an idea of how much the energy consumption has been reduced, because that's also another very important part. We have to build our activities and our cities in such a way that we reduce the energy demand, that's one very important step, because we are, again, as mentioned in the beginning of this, we are not very efficient. And then, of course, leading to a bigger energy coming from the wind. In Norway, they are closer to that. You'll see that they have 98% because they use hydropower. So they use all the rivers and a damming system to provide all of that energy. For Denmark, it has to come at another pace because it's based on wind and a little bit on the sun. So this is a scheme showing that we want to go from the old infrastructure where we have big power plants that have to distribute to intermediates to the different neighborhoods. We actually want to have an energy collection on site where that is, be it the sun, the wind, the water, and then have an infrastructure that can be connected both ways, because the green energy, it's not something constant. So you need to have it open at both ends. And then it can provide for the households and for our mobility. So of course, this poses some technological challenges, but it needs technology and it needs people to run it. How does that look like on the city scale? This is an example from Hamburg, where they have created this building that uses the wave energy to provide some of the electricity. It uses solar panels and photovoltaics, one for the energy and another one for the hot water, so that it is completely self-sufficient. So today, the buildings are enormous poles of energy. They use a lot of it, and they could instead produce the energy that they need. And sometimes, depending on how much the sun is shining and how much the wind is blowing, or the waves are at the high speed, then they can produce the energy that can be fed into through the network and into the city in other places where this is not possible. The concept is more or less this sustainable by design idea, where in buildings and at the building scale, but this can be also extrapolated to a city level. The building is actually made out of physical elements in the structure, in the facade. And then, of course, every step of the way, there's a decision about how it will look like and how it will accommodate its users. So you can play a lot with the form, which is called passive design. When you use the actual form to get most sunlight in wintertime, and in summertime, when you want to have more protection and avoid overheating, then you can also play with the form of the building, because the sun position in summertime is higher, and then in wintertime, the sun is lower. It's 38 degrees versus 51 degrees. And you can play with that position to have to cast a shadow and to avoid overheating in summertime. So as well as you can play with the form and the materials with the passive elements, you can also play, of course, with the active elements, which are then the heating, the actual heating that you can put into the building, or the cooling. And how do you produce that energy? It can be algae facades. It can be, as illustrated here, where you can take the energy from the earth, the geothermal, and heat up the building. If it's an office building, again, you also use the machinery. So all of these different computers, screens, everything that we have in there, they give energy. Also, the human body is giving energy. So some of the places are actually using that actively. At the bigger scale, of course, this also has to be coordinated, because you need to again, collect the energy where it's at. You can also take the shape and the form of the different city blocks and the way you design them so that you make this process much more efficient, so not to waste the energy. So let's see how Copenhagen has done it. There's a lot of brownfield areas in the harbor part where the big industries have left the city. There's a little bit left here in what you see in Restfälleøen, but then everything else has been transformed on the south side in the central part of the city, of the old city. And then what you see here big in red, it's actually the part that I'm going to talk about. And you see that it is huge. So it's called Nordhavn. It's actually the Northern Harbor. And this is its location in Copenhagen. It's 2 stops away with the metro from the city center. So you can get to it very, very fast. But it has old infrastructure, road and train infrastructure that actually separates it from an easy pedestrian and bicycle access at this point to this area. So this area here has started being developed in 2007. There was an international competition for how to transform this from a harbor facility that has been existing since 1901. This entire area is reclaimed land. You won't see it on any older map of the city. So everything here has been filled with the years. And then what you see here in green is actually being filled up now. So the process didn't stop. It is owned by the state and the city. So in that sense, it's very easy for the two entities to come to an agreement and to develop the city forward using these areas. Why are these important and relevant? It's because in the 80s, and especially the late 80s, Copenhagen was really close to being bankrupt. There was a big part of the population that has moved to the bigger Copenhagen area. And of course, here you pay taxes in the municipality where you live. So if you have fewer people living in your municipal borders, then you have fewer taxes. And then, of course, industry is living, which was a big player in here. So that's why the municipality had a very, very low budget, and it was really on the edge of bankruptcy. The mayor at that time was saying that we need to have some work, some projects in the city, because the only crane that you could see here was for bungee jumping. So that you have a picture of what was going on at that point. And then instead of making a loan to the bank and having this unsustainable economic model, the city has decided to come with an agreement with the state and start building the metro in the south here in Ørestal. And this is the first line of metro of Copenhagen. And the way of building that is actually using this transit-oriented development approach where transportation comes in first, and you finance this project by selling the plots of land that you own and making thus the funds for building the metro. So this is actually the same story here, but at a larger scale. So M1 and M2, the 2 first lines of metro, have been built with selling the plots in Ørestal, so here in the south part of the city. But to pay for the ring, which has opened last year with the M3 and 4, connecting the inner parts of Copenhagen on a circular pattern. That's why it's called the ring. It has been paid for by selling plots of land to developers in this area of the city. And in 2007, we had the new law for this. Every single project has to go through a planning law and has to be approved before it starts. And it was built into stages. UN building and the Aarhus neighborhoods. And then second part is a little bit up north. And then everything is paused. It will be phase 3 and then phase 4 and so on. There's a good reasoning for that. So that you have an image of how this was looking like in the 80s. You have the big cruise ships and hangars and silos for corn and the cement. Everything was sort of packed into here. And you still have some of the containers and the cranes. They're still there now. But then these two areas that you have in this photo, they have been developed already. They're almost done. And besides being just another development and growing the city towards the harbor, you see here the winning concept, which is creating this urban delta. And the emphasis on the green and the blue infrastructure, the water and all the different channels and the green parts that act as a buffer against the winds and the storms. There's also this emphasis of using one existing network to save energy, and that was the road network. So it builds upon the existing street grid, and then it actually adds another layer, which is the network for heating, cooling, servicing basically the buildings. And this has to happen locally this time. So this is actually also an energy laboratory and that smart city paradigm that has been applied to Copenhagen. Again, also because you have city and port, which is the state and the city again dealing with this development. And because it has changed ownership from industry to residential and living and working, then it has this ability of sort of building anew, if you will. And then again, adding more land on top of here. With the green, this is not just a green corridor that is represented here. Of course, it has to be green underneath and providing a beautiful path for bicyclists, but it's not just that. This loop here is also the metro that will serve this area. So it's part of the fourth line of the metro with 2 existing stations already built at this date. And then the rest will come with the developments continuing forward. So this is also supposed to be the sustainable city of the future, Nordhavn. So this entire project, it has been developed around this idea of using nature as a guide. So islets and canals, blue and green city, being this city that actually preserves some of the buildings. This is not very common in the Danish context because the work labor is actually really expensive. So the easiest thing for a lot of developers, also something that they prefer because they don't have to deal with all of the preservation and cultural thing. They just put everything down and build a new. And of course, when you do that, then you can just do a lot of the things that you would want to increase profit on selling the properties afterwards. But this is the place where the older buildings from late 18, so closer to the city. There's also some parts from the late 1800s, but mainly from the 1900s up until Second World War. Beautiful red brick buildings, and some of the silos are kept and transformed into other activities. So keeping this identity and history, and this is very important lesson learned from the other development that came first with the M1 and the M2. And then the 5-minute city, this is actually you see the green loop again. This concept that you can get to any parts of the city by walking or biking or taking public transportation, and you can do so in 5 to 10 minutes. And you can have access also to water and nature in the same time frame. And last but not least, the two very important parts, which are CO2 friendly city. So the way in which it is built, but mainly the way in which it is utilized. So it mainly refers to the energy and the emissions that come from using this city area rather than the first part of it. So this is not something that a lot of building sites and not a lot of cities address. So we're looking more at buildings after they were built, not so much before that. And a lot of energy and a lot of waste that's embedded into buildings before they get to be utilized. And then we have the intelligent grid that I was talking about. So you see here all the different layers, the different infrastructure that have to come in to service the 21st century city and people's needs. And that, of course, has to communicate with each other so that we become much more effective. It has to do with energy, it has to do with mobility, and it has to do with heating and cooling. Yes, cooling too. Now the wind is blowing really hard and it's quite cold outside. But summers are getting way hotter in Copenhagen, and it has been so during the past 3 years, I believe. And it's a really big change in the climate. So what does that look like? It basically looks like, again, instead of having that big power plant, every single unit is actually contributing. You see even the little farm here with the biogas, or the networks in the city. So the facades and the roofs, they can contribute to energy and food provision. Going to come to food as well. It's not that easy to control, so that's why it's so globalized that it's not at that point where it can be easily manageable. Not at this point, and it takes a lot of political will to change that. But the city can provide a lot of space. We have also an example of that in Copenhagen, where food, not just energy, can be produced locally, and all of the leftover space, or all of the space that is not utilized, such as the roofs or the facades, or the space in between the buildings, can serve for that. But this is mainly referring to energy at this point. So of course we'll have some centers along the way to be able to the nodes to be able to connect the different infrastructures and to have this capacity of also functioning when in a storm, and in an aftermath of a storm. For instance, like it happened during Sandy, where the south part of Manhattan was actually under darkness, because everything, when everything is connected to one unit, if that unit gets to be damaged in under such an event, then the whole city is paralyzed. So we are so addicted to and so dependent on electricity. We have a lot of devices that are very hungry, and they have to be fed, but also a lot of the appliances around the house, and not to mention the hospitals and schools and all the very key important buildings in the city. So the advantages of such a system as opposed to the old one is that you have a network of small power plants, if you will, that actually contribute to providing this energy. And then if one gets to be shut down, then it can actually pull energy from the system because the others are still standing. So it is a much more sustainable network. And it refers, of course, a lot to the way we produce the energy. It has to come from green sources, the way we utilize it. So everything in a house has to be smart. Smart means here more efficient. Also using what we built as an absorber of energy, just like nature is doing. And then, of course, going into mobility and empowering mobility as well, especially on a smaller scale. In Nordhavn, it looks like this. So this is very specific to that. it actually uses surface water streets and gray water to filter, use it locally actually. So having the nature elements that is that are cleaning the water on the spot, and then it can be released into the harbor. And then, of course, black waters are actually going to the cleaning plant. But here we're talking about the water that comes from the roofs and all of the water that is just passing through the area, and it's just costing the city much more energy to cleaning the water locally, referring to the gray water. Also using cooling, but not in the sense of air conditioning, but using the water from the sea, because the sea here has a constant temperature more or less all the way throughout the year. Now the temperature during the day goes from 2 degrees, I'm talking Celsius, so 2 to 8, 9, and then it goes back again during the night, but the water stays at 9 degrees. So in the summertime, this is beneficial because you can actually take this water and run it to the building, and it cools off, especially the offices. And then this is a sustainable source. And this is, of course, possible only if you build the network together with the city. Then we're talking garbage, and that's, of course, something that can be recycled, and it will go into the local recycling farm, but otherwise it goes just across the water on Ama. It goes to Copenhagen, and it gets to be burned in the garbage incinerator, and then it provides heating through district heating to the rest of Copenhagen. And then locally here, there's a wind power that is utilized. The wind park is very close by in the south, and there's more wind turbines to come. There's also heat pumps wherever possible, using the water at this point, and using solar panels and water as a heat storage. And then, of course, everything that is in the building level that makes it possible for recovering the heat from the different appliances, and then releasing that during the night when temperature is lower. And you see some of the wind power also goes to powering the metro. Of course, the metro is electrified. It has been so since the beginning. It's a mini metro. It's a small one, but it runs on a higher frequency. And then, of course, the electricity that is powering everything else that we have in here. With the CO2 that gets to be emitted from parts of this area, there's a sea lettuce farm that gets to be the biomass for the biogas plant in Lunetten and the ethanol plant in Lunetten. So a lot of this waste and new produced sea lettuce with the CO2 locally actually gets to be transformed into energy again. But I think it's obvious from this scheme as well that it's necessary to have this network and to have this overall thought of who does what and how do we collect, and involving all the different parts in here, all the different actors, right? Because this model cannot function otherwise. And then this is how it looks like today. More or less, there's building sites everywhere, so it's a big fuss. This is the metro. It'll go through here. Here, this part is on the ground, and then from here up, you'll see that it'll go above ground. And then this is Aarhus Street neighborhood. This is the first one that was built on the two sides of the canal. And then this part is the second part, and it's under construction, and still some buildings like the International School in Copenhagen. This has been built already, but the rest of it is still with warehouses. You see the cranes, and this is where the big ships are coming in. The beautiful example of this model, it's called the circular economy, and it's also called the Copenhagen model of passing from this collaborative to a neoliberal planning system, where this is opening up to the markets and the profit markets, is that this reclaimed land now can grow, because when you build a metro in the city center, it has to go on the ground. So you have to dig tunnels, and you have to do something with that earth, right? And all of the leftover cement and everything that comes from the temporary builds that support the metro construction. So everything that comes from that, all the trucks come to Nordhavn, and they just fill up this area. So this can actually go on and sustain itself for a while. And the city can provide the economic means for all of this project to happen, and also some of the other social and energy retrofitting projects that have to take place in the city, but it's not so easy to find an immediate funding for in appearance. So this is focus on the buildings. When we come to the energy part on the left here, you see the old corn silo that was not torn down, as is the tradition in Denmark, but it was actually kept. And you see it here to the right being transformed to apartments. And because it is so different, and it has all of this extraordinary living situation surrounded by water, and so high up. In Copenhagen, we have buildings of 5 to 6 stories high, and it's a city that incentivizes movement and walking up and down the stairs, and walking in between the buildings, and biking to keep the population healthy. This is actually a very different model. So the silo has been transformed into apartments that go from, I believe the smallest is 1,200 square feet, and the biggest one on the top here is around 4,000 square feet, so that you have a bit of an idea. And the energy here saved is enormous, because as I mentioned before, every single building has to clear the site, has to build the foundations. And Copenhagen, this requires a lot of energy, because the groundwater is actually really high, and you have to pump it out of the building site 24/7 before you finish raising the basement and the foundations, and then you start building above the ground. So this requires an enormous amount of energy. And also think about just, utilizing this, not utilizing the structure and tear it down, then it means that all of this concrete and CO2 that is embedded into it, in first building it, it would have gone to waste, and it would have just added into the atmosphere. So here instead is just adding the utilities needed for it to be livable, and it has ended up being the most expensive apartment in Copenhagen, the one up here where you have 360 degrees view all the way around. And it has posed some comments and some critique to regards to how accessible this area of the city is turning out to be, because as I mentioned, when you open up to the liberal market, and then you lose some of the social housing and affordable housing policies that Copenhagen used to have up until '89, then you kind of invite a very homogeneous group of people to move in here. So you kind of create a separated, segregated community of young families with a lot of income to be able to pay for this. So Copenhageners call it a rich ghetto in becoming. So this is the downside of it. Another example of saving energy and retrofitting, this is actually Portland cement. It's situated in Aalborg with the factory, which is a Danish city up north in the northern part of Jutland. They have the offices here. So they have kept their two silos, and they have built the office spaces all the way around it. Another example was using buildings as energy providers. And of course, they have to be connected to the network to feed in energy and take energy when they need it. So call it green energy moves into the city center, and it looks like this. This is one example from Nordhavn. It's the international school. And all of the blue panels that you see here on the facade, they're not just fancy, beautiful colored tiles, but they're actually photovoltaics and solar panels. So they provide a lot of the energy that this building is using. So using the active facades and active elements that we put in there, not just to have a fancy makeup on the building, but actually to make it useful and efficient. Another example is across from that, 2 blocks away from that, which is the a UN building. This has on the top here, you see these lines, they're actually solar panels. So they have about 500 square meters, that'll be 5,000 square feet of solar panels providing the energy that is needed inside. And on top of that, the star shape here is not just a crazy architect dream, it's actually to increase daylight and to work with the shape of the building so that artificial lighting is almost not needed. And it also collects rainwater so that toilets are using that. We don't flush it with the clean drinkable water. We actually flush it with the rainwater in here. And this is supposed to be, again, another idea and another invitation of thinking this further. This is not as such an integrated design as we saw previously, since the panels are added on the roof and not an integral part of the facade, but it's sort of, it's way better than a regular building that is consuming. Also, the cradle to cradle concept is used here. So not just building things with a linear mindset where we go from the resource to the grave and we create piles of waste, but actually reusing things. So this is the only building that the city has built here. The rest of it is done by developers. And this is a parking house. And it's again this change of mindset and an invitation to walk and bike and take public transportation. And the car is not needed on a daily basis. How do you work with human behavior in such a context? Well, when you first come outside of your flat, you have your biking rack. A little further, a few steps away, you have the bus stop or you have the metro stop. And then for the car, you actually have to work further. So because cars are stationary 95% of the time and they take up to 70% of the city space and city surface, then this is another invitation for creating a hub where you, in the neighborhood, you can put all the cars into a parking house. And the dream is that this in the future will be self-powered and will have all electric shared car fleets into them. This is not the case, but it actually uses this idea of assemble for disassembly, which is a cradle to cradle concept, where you can take these panels again, and this is just pure metal, corten steel, and then you can reuse it in other buildings. You don't have to use the energy for sourcing it again. On top of that, on its roof, it's a big public space, a gym, outdoor gym, where you can go in and exercise. And all of this surface is actually made with recycled Nike shoes soles. So it's also an invitation to rethink production and become more efficient and to come to that zero waste mentality. This is one, and we're looking forward to the next ones, and hopefully we're going to get to that dream. So this is again this atmosphere from that place where the bicycle is the first one that comes, and public spaces and waterfronts are actually public domains, and everything is connected on this level and made for people movement. And you see some temporary parking spots in here. And these are some of the renderings. It's a mix of images and renderings because some of it is not built yet, but also transforming and keeping this identity of the harbor, what you see here with the containers and container buildings, and keeping the cranes in place, but also making room for people and nature on the waterfront, and keeping it with the free access to everybody, and integrating water as an asset, and not so much as a liability, because water levels will go up. All the models in Copenhagen show that we especially have issues with the groundwater level, and we have to learn how to cope with it. And I'll come to transportation now. And this is just to have, again, a bigger picture. We're zooming out a little bit. In 1947, just after the war, Copenhagen has adopted this plan for developing the city around a finger plan. That means, well, it looks like a palm of your hand when you put it there on top of this map. It's actually having public transportation corridors served by the train, and the city will develop all the way around this. In 2002 comes the metro, M1 and M2, the one that goes to the airport and the one that goes to Ørsted and connects the city across. There's also another train line that goes on the second ring of Copenhagen to connect the fingers farther away from the city center. And then here with the light pink, you see the light rail project that I was referring to. I'm actually here right now on this map. And the ring, this is the M3 that opened up last year, with the M4 from 2 stations in Nordhavn, Oia and Nordhavn, and then going down to the main train station. And the rest here will be built in the coming years. Here with the development, and then down south to the existing city, because this has been developed almost in full. But again, paid by selling plots of land in Nordhavn and putting down into the metro. So this entire concept of Copenhagen is actually transit-oriented development. It means that you need to provide access to good quality public transportation and affordable public transportation, so that the city can develop in a sustainable way. In between the fingers, so in between these lines, you can have natural spaces, green spaces that are actually belong of the city. So mobility is very important because, again, it's the number third emitter. And the current debate goes with politicians and bigger companies on electrifying everything and reinventing the paradigm. But if we look at this, so this is an exercise that we did in Aarhus. If you have 50 people and 50 cars, this is the space, and then come again to that space comment that I made previously with the car infrastructure and the amount it's taking in the city, and how this has to be coordinated to for it to function. And then, of course, public transportation. Here we use the bus, and again, 50 people, you can put them into one bus. So you see already the efficiency. And if it were to be bicycles, then it's more or less the same space. The difference is that the biking infrastructure is actually contributing. It's making municipalities money, and the car infrastructure is actually costing municipalities money. So it's a big incentive to go towards this. And the paradigm is actually working towards this, right? So electric car, self-driving car, and here we're talking technology, and we're talking like pure transformation of the old paradigm, and then just changing the car fleet and having the infrastructure for that. But it's still a matter of space. when we talk about this. A better way of dealing with this, and the one implemented in Nordhavn mainly, is looking more so at the flow on the street, because now we have traffic jams. We've seen that when we create more road space, then more cars come, and every single time we find ourselves in this gridlock situation, and it's becoming worse and worse in the bigger European cities, in the states all over the globe. So rather than looking at the vehicle that is way bigger than we are and heavier just to transport one person on a daily basis and be stationary 95% of the time, looking more at the capacity per hour and then the space that is occupied by every single piece of infrastructure. So down here you see the space utilized by different modes of transportation, and up here you see the capacity. So it's a very easy decision on how to move people and also how to create cities, because again, you have to build them in this mindset of transit-oriented development, and you have to build them with mobility in mind, because otherwise it will be very difficult to reverse that. For instance, when you have a very sprawled, low-density infrastructure, city infrastructure or settlement infrastructure, and then of course you cannot pay some of these more expensive train projects. It will be more towards the car. Nordhavn has this little toy here as another test. Again, it's a laboratory for energy and for technology and human life. It has this electric driverless bus that goes around the block. So this is the Aarhus neighborhood. And then it goes around this, because this is still a test. It's the second city in Denmark that has this. Aalborg was the first one to have it in green. And this is also collecting data. So it's not just moving people around, but it can use this capacity of collecting data on traffic, collecting data on the infrastructure, what it comes on the road, and then feeding that into the system to improve the service. This is the future plan for Nordhavn. So again, this tiny part here was built, a tiny part here in the south across with the UN building that looks a bit different than in this model. And then the station here in Nordhavn, and then the station here in oia and the international school. And the rest is still to come. The M4 is what you see here from main train station to oia. And then this is also built so that it brings new connections with the existing infrastructure. So for the street traffic, when we talk smart cities, it's mainly infrastructure on how to improve the flow, so synchronize the lights. It actually made a huge difference in saving up to 15 minutes on a daily basis on the major arteries of the city. But for public transportation, it has actually shortened time travel with 5, 10 to 30 minutes, depending on where you are, and providing access to 85% of the Copenhageners in the inner part of the city, access directly to a metro within 5 to 10 minutes. So this has been a massive project, but its importance lies in connecting with the S train infrastructure. As you see here, the different station names, and they have an S. This is the S train, and it connects across. And then this is not to stop here. This project will continue. So this is from in between oia and Nordhavn. It doesn't want to run. Technology has failed me today. I apologize for that. But this is actually when we have been on site and see exactly how the system has to work, because it's a driverless metro. It's a light metro. It relies on frequency. So you have this above tracks wherever the city is lower on density and can provide space above for it to be built, but otherwise it goes underground. And from the outside, the stations are looking like this. Again, using a different design in this area rather than in the rest of the city. But here is very crucial that the technology and the people behind the technology are actually up to 100% in the Center for Traffic Control. When you have 2 lines of metro, the efficiency of it was 99%. And when you add more lines, then it gets more complicated when you have to coordinate this driverless system that runs every 2 minutes. And of course, this is very important to, it's important to understand as well how many people use this so that constant improvement is fed into the system and it functions for the best. And this is from the other angle. You see Copenhagen inner city here, and this is part of the Nordhavn that still waits to be developed. And it will follow the same principles, but it will take time. This is development foreseen to take from 2007, as I mentioned, up until 2050. At least. The city doesn't want to create another crisis in developing everything at once. It provides also lessons that can be learned in the first developed parts to be fed into the newer development and the newer stage. And then, of course, they still have to apply that 25% of affordable housing that is mandatory by planning law in Copenhagen and in Denmark. And who knows, in the future, this is something that does not exist here. So talking about building the metro and connecting and also climate adapting and climate proofing the city, there was a discussion about, well, we grow Nordhavn towards Sweden, but we also need to build a dike here for when the sea level will rise. So the idea came to expand this Rijsvalleøen and Christiania that is on this side, and then just going and building another island. Why not? So instead of just having, this is again that sort of efficiency mindset that is so Nordic in a sense, when don't just build a piece of infrastructure, but build something that has at least 2 functions. So a smart city is more so, again, about efficiency of resources, efficiency of design, efficiency in the energy needs, and also efficiency in the terms of mobility. And again, food is not touched here because it is a more complicated matter in terms of what politicians think. And a lot of it comes from outside of the city, outside of Denmark, and all over the globe. So that is less taken into consideration here, but it should be a part of this concept. And this is just a little of incentive because we hear in many groups of our population talking about this is too expensive or this takes a lot of resources, but it's actually providing a lot of jobs, and it's also providing a lot of opportunities for the future. And this is just a figure from IRENA, and this is from 17 when 10.3 million jobs were created in the renewable energy sector alone. So not to mention buildings and not to mention cities and city making and all of this. So it's mainly energy. It's always the people. So this is, I think, very important to keep in mind. Smart cities is not just technology taking over, but it's basically technology using us and serving us into creating a better life quality and providing for the future. Thank you very much. That was the intro on Nordhavn. That was a very short, compact version of it. If you have any questions, I cannot see, Q&A.
Yeah, it looks like we had a couple of questions come in about the kind of public perception of all of these changes and if the government had some backlash or any opposition.
There's always opposition from a bigger group or a smaller group. I think it's very important to understand how to communicate these things. And it's also important to keep in mind for Nordhavn that it's not the first development of this kind. So the mainly criticized development, it's the Cradle of the metro, which is Ørsted, and they took some of that criticism and embedded into the new development. For instance, the ground floors of the main street were bought back by the municipality so that they have this rent control and activities and shops can come in at an affordable cost. Of course, it has this criticism of not offering the affordable housing solutions and making this more of a high-end development. But they have taken this step-by-step approach and showing that they consult the public. It's not so many that they can consult in the beginning because there's no one living there. It was industry, so it's mainly companies that have left. And you start a little bit from scratch. But afterwards, when the area becomes more populated, then public is consulted directly impacted by it, and they'll have to take that into consideration. So now it's still sort of in that phase where phase 1 and 2 were tested. They have shown that they incorporated some of the criticism from the older parts that have been developed first, but they still have a long way to go. So criticism is not stopping. I mean, in Denmark, it's not a concept that you go and vote and then you stop and you do that just every other 4 years. But you are active in your comments and your criticism and in sort of guiding the government in the direction that you want it to go.
Are there any other questions? I think we can stick around for a couple minutes if we do have other questions.
Mhm.
Otherwise, thank you so much, Sylvia. That was so great, so interesting to hear. And thanks all of you who came and gave up your lunchtime to spend some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So especially lunchtime, it's really important. But if you have questions now, or if you can think of them later, you can also send them, and I'll be more than happy to answer them afterwards. I know that after things settle, then it will be more obvious. You have a lot of question marks. Yeah.